The fabric was heavier than I expected. Maybe it was just the nerves or the humidity that clung to my skin under the robe, but the weight of the moment felt real, like the culmination of years of sleepless nights, whispered doubts, silent tears, and quiet victories had all been stitched into the seams of my graduation gown. I adjusted the cap slightly, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My name would be called today, not as someone's daughter, wife, or assistant, just me, my name, my work, my degree. You look tired, my mother-in-law said as she stepped into the room, her eyes scanning me like I was a piece of misplaced furniture. Thanks, I said flatly, refusing to let her needle find a thread to pull. She smiled, or rather, she moved her lips in a way that might resemble a smile to someone less observant. I just meant, you must be stressed. All this, just for a piece of paper. I breathed deeply. This wasn't new. From the first moment I told her I was going back to school, she had made it her mission to remind me that ambition was unbecoming in a wife. That a woman's worth came from what she could give to her family, not what she could achieve for herself. But she didn't see the nights I studied until dawn while my husband, Lucas, snored softly beside me. She didn't know the hours I spent at the library, juggling assignments, emails, and part-time work. And she certainly didn't care. Lucas had driven in silence most of the way. It wasn't always like this. There was a time when he championed my dreams, sat through my presentations, asked questions about my coursework, but something shifted after my third semester. Maybe it was the distance I didn't have the energy to bridge. Maybe it was something else entirely. You excited? I asked him as we parked. Sure, he said, staring straight ahead. That was the beginning of the unraveling. The invisible thread of tension tightened with each silent moment as we walked toward the auditorium. Memories of my childhood flashed in the corners of my mind. My mother, with tired hands and a hopeful heart, telling me, "You have to be better than me. Promise me you won't settle." My father, gone before I understood what ambition meant. My high school guidance counselor, raising an eyebrow when I said I wanted to study political science. "Ambitious for your background," he had said. I spotted my mother in the crowd, tears in her eyes, a proud smile breaking across her face. She waved, and I waved back, just before slipping into the graduates' line. From the stage, I could see the rows of families. My eyes landed on Lucas and his mother. She sat stiffly, like she was attending a court hearing instead of a celebration. Lucas scrolled on his phone. The dean began the ceremony. Names were called, hands shook, photos snapped. And then it was mine. Danielle Morales, Bachelor of Political Science, magna cum laude, applause. Flashes the warmth of the dean's handshake, and then I saw her lean over. My mother-in-law voice. Just low enough for intimacy, just loud enough for damage. This means nothing without a husband. People turned, even Lucas glanced sideways. My heart stopped, but I kept walking. I accepted my diploma, I smiled for the camera, and I decided, right then, that this was not the end of the story. Asterisk applause faded into murmurs, then into the soft rustling of gowns and programs. I returned to my seat among the graduates, my diploma clutched so tightly. In my hands, I could feel the edge pressing into my palm. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until I exhaled slowly, deliberately trying to let go of the sting still echoing in my ears. This means nothing without a husband. The words felt like acid, quiet, but corrosive. I scanned the crowd. My mother's face was a beacon of pride, eyes glistening, oblivious to what had just transpired. Thank God. But others had heard. I could tell by the way heads had turned. A few curious glances floated my way. A whisper here, a raised brow there. My throat tightened. Next to her, Lucas stared blankly forward, neither embarrassed nor surprised. If anything, he looked tired or resigned. He didn't correct her, didn't flinch, didn't do anything. I turned away before I could spiral. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. One name after another, caps tossed in the air like feathers. Cheers, hugs, flashes of camera phones. But I stayed seated longer than most, trying to reassemble the moment. Tape it back together so I wouldn't remember it like this. Afterward, we were ushered outside for photos. The sky was smeared with the kind of golden light that photographers call magic. My classmates hugged their parents, partners, siblings. I watched them with a strange sense of detachment, like I was a ghost. At my own celebration, Lucas approached, his hands in his pockets. "Congrats," he said, without meeting my eyes. "Thanks," I replied. My voice cracked slightly, and I hated that it did. Before I could ask him what the hell had just happened back there, why he hadn't said anything, why she was even there, his mother stepped in. "Smile," she chirped. holding her phone up. You'll want to remember this day. I stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The audacity. The venom disguised as pleasantry. I wanted to scream. I'll remember all of it, including the moment you tried to erase me. But I just smiled. For the picture after that. We joined my mother by the fountain. She pulled me into a tight hug, and for a brief second, everything else dissolved. Her embrace was warm, earthly like home. My baby, she whispered, voice cracking. You did it. I did. I whispered back. We did. She beamed, holding my face in her calloused hands. You made me so proud, Mia. Her joy contrasted so violently with the coldness I just endured that I almost doubled over with emotion. If she sensed anything wrong, she didn't say it aloud. But her eyes flickered briefly to Lucas and his mother. I hadn't told her much. I kept our growing distance private, tucked behind neutral words and tired smiles. Partly because I was still trying to make sense of it myself. And partly because I didn't want to hear, I told you so. You two should take some time alone, my mom said gently. Celebrate. You earned it. Lucas nodded noncommittally, as if the idea of celebrating was a burden. We ended up driving in silence again. After we got home, I went to the bedroom, unzipping the gown and hanging it carefully. My fingers brushed the fabric one last time, and I wondered if I'd ever be able to look at it without remembering her voice. Lucas appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame. You were amazing up there, he said. His tone was distant, almost rehearsed. Why didn't you say anything? I asked, turning to face him. He blinked. About what? I stared. You heard her. He shrugged. It wasn't the time to make a scene. And when is the time? My voice rose before I could stop it. She humiliated me. In front of strangers. At my graduation. Lucas. He rubbed the back of his neck, sighing. She doesn't get it. She's old school. She thinks women need a husband to be complete. And do you agree with her? I asked, trembling. He didn't answer. That silence spoke louder than any word. I turned away. You used to believe in me? What happened? He stepped forward, but there was a distance between us that no physical step could bridge. It's not that I don't believe in you. It's just everything's been different since you started school. You mean since I started dreaming? I snapped. Since I stopped fitting the mold she wanted me to stay in, he opened his mouth. But I wasn't done. You think this was easy? For me, balancing school, work, and our marriage. I needed support, not silence. Not passive tolerance. His face tightened. I didn't sign up to be left behind. That hit like a slap. Left behind. I never asked you to follow me, I said quietly. But I hoped you'd walk beside me. We stood there for a long time, the silence growing unbearable. Finally, he turned and walked out, the door clicking shut behind him. That night, I curled up in bed alone, scrolling through the pictures. The one with my mom made me smile. The one with Lucas and his mother I deleted without a second thought. Somewhere around 2 a.m., I got up and opened my laptop. There was an email I'd been meaning to write. A speech contest submission hosted by a local women's leadership council. I hesitated for just a moment before opening a new document. Title, More Than a Wife, and I began to type. Asterisk, I didn't sleep that night. The cursor blinked at me like it was daring me to tell the truth. I stared at the sentence I'd typed more than a wife and tried to summon the courage to keep going. Words didn't come easily at first. They were tangled up in years of silence, of swallowing disappointment with a smile. But then I started typing, and it all poured out. I wrote about growing up in a 2-bedroom apartment with peeling paint and a mother who taught me to dream anyway. About late nights doing homework by the glow of the oven light because our electricity was unreliable. About watching other girls get new shoes each school year while I taped mine from the inside to hold them together. And I wrote about Lucas. How we met at 20. How he made me feel seen for the first time in my life. How he once brought me a used copy of The Second Sex on our second date and said, "You talk like this book." I thought it was a compliment. Back then, he used to admire the fire in me. He fanned it. I wrote about how his mother was icy the first time we met. She offered me lemonade but never sugar. Asked questions like, do your parents own their home? And what do you plan to do with that degree? Her smiles were always edged with thorns. When I finished the draft at sunrise, my eyes burned from exhaustion. But I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks: clarity. Not peace, not yet, but direction. I submitted the speech. I didn't tell anyone. Not Lucas, not my mom, not even my best friend Amaya, who'd sent me 6 heart emojis the day before, saying, "I'm so proud of you, I could scream." That morning, I stayed home while Lucas left early. We didn't talk. I made tea, wrapped myself in an old blanket, and stared out the kitchen window. Our neighbor's garden was in bloom: sunflowers, tall and stubborn. I remembered something my mother once told me. Some things grow best in broken soil. I spent the afternoon sorting through boxes in the hallway closet. Not for any particular reason, maybe I just needed to touch something real. I found old journals, a faded sweatshirt from undergrad, and a shoebox filled with rejection letters from scholarships. I hadn't gotten .funny, I'd kept them all. Each, we regret to inform you, had once stung like a personal failure. Now they read like old scars, painful, but proof I'd tried. Beneath the papers, I found something I hadn't thought about in years. A crumpled index card with a single line scrawled in my mom's handwriting. You are allowed to outgrow the version of yourself others are comfortable with. I held that card for a long time. That evening, I called my mom. Everything okay, baby? She asked. There was always that pause in her voice, that checking in between the lines like she knew I was only ever one deep breath away from crying. I'm fine, I said, then paused. No, actually, I'm not. I told her everything. The whisper at graduation, the silence from Lucas, the speech I'd written at 2 a.m. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, she sighed. I wish I could hug you right now. You kind of are, I whispered. A long pause. You know, Danielle, she said softly, your grandma once told me that women like us women who break patterns will always be misunderstood by people who are comfortable with small lives. Don't let that make you smaller. I closed my eyes and pressed the phone to my cheek. Tank, you mud? Whatever happens next, she said, don't let that woman's voice be louder than your own. We hung up and I went to the bedroom. Lucas wasn't home yet. I pulled out my journal, the one I'd started keeping again in my final semester. I flipped to the last page and began a list. Things I want to remember. The way my mother looked at me when I got my diploma. That I didn't flinch when my mother-in-law tried to diminish me. That I didn't let it end there. That even in silence, I kept writing. That this story is mine. I stopped at 5. It felt right. At midnight, Lucas still wasn't home. I didn't text, I didn't call. Instead, I opened a folder on my desktop labeled Applications, Internships, Fellowships, and Mentorship programs I had once bookmarked but never dared to finish. The first one asked for a personal statement. I stared at the prompt. What drives you? I smiled. Just a little, and I began again. Asterisk, Lucas came home just after 1 a.m. I heard the keys before I heard the door. The sound of metal against wood was sharper than usual. Or maybe I was just more awake to the world than I had been in months. I stayed in bed, still listening to his footsteps. He didn't come to the bedroom right away. I heard the clink of a glass, the soft creak of the fridge, a deep sigh. Maybe he thought I'd be asleep. Maybe he hoped I was. But I wasn't. He finally walked into the room. He froze. Our eyes met across the dark. His shoulders slumped, slightly like he'd been caught in something. Though neither of us said what. I didn't mean to wake you, he said, voice low. You didn't. I sat up, turned on the lamp. The light was soft but merciless. It made everything real. Where were you? He hesitated, then answered, just out. Needed air. I studied him. Rumpled shirt, faint trace of something smoky on his clothes. Bar. Friend's house. It didn't matter. We need to talk, I said, my voice steady. He rubbed his eyes. Now, yes, now. A long silence settled between us. He sat at the edge of the bed but faced away, like he couldn't bear to look directly at me. Why are you unhappy with me? I asked, breaking the quiet. He didn't answer immediately. I don't know, he finally said. Maybe I'm unhappy with everything. It was a slap in slow motion. Honest, lazy, evasive. You used to be proud of me. I whispered. I still am, he said, almost defensively. But I miss how things were, before all the books, before the lectures, before you started changing. Changing? The word landed with the dull thud of blame. I didn't change, Lucas, I grew. There's a difference. But you don't need me anymore, he said, eyes finally meeting mine. You're building this whole world without me in it. I swallowed hard. You could have been in it. You still could. But instead, you chose to stand next to someone who belittled me on one of the most important days of my life. She's my mom, he said weakly. And I'm your wife. I said, stronger now. Do you know how humiliating that moment was for me? Hearing her say I'm nothing without a husband while my husband sat silently beside her. He looked ashamed. Good asterisk. She didn't mean it like that, he muttered. Then how did she mean it? I snapped. Because it sounded pretty clear. He shook his head, standing up. I can't do this right now. You never want to do this, I said, rising to, but I will not shrink myself to keep this marriage afloat. A long pause. His face was a mix of guilt and exhaustion. I need time, he he said. I nodded slowly. Take it. And with that, I grabbed a pillow and blanket and walked out of our bedroom. I slept on the couch that night, but it was the first sleep in a long time that didn't feel like a compromise. Asterisk the next morning. I made coffee the way I liked it, strong, sweet, no compromise. Lucas was gone. I didn't check where. I opened my laptop and found an email from the Women's Leadership Council. My hands trembled as I clicked. Dear Danielle, we are pleased to inform you that your speech, More Than a Wife, has been selected as one of our 5 finalists. We would like to invite you to present it live at our Empower Her Symposium next Saturday. I reread the message 3 times before exhaling. I smiled, a real one this time, then I panicked. Me. Present it. In front of people. A panel of judges. An auditorium of women who probably had more experience, more confidence, more poise. But then I remembered my mother's words. Don't let that woman's voice be louder than your own. And I replied to the email. Thank you. I accept. Asterisk the rest of the week blurred into pockets of emotion. I practiced the speech aloud every day, in front of mirrors, while cooking, even once while standing in the shower. I edited the pacing, the tone, the rhythm. Every word mattered. Lucas didn't come home 2 nights in a row. When he returned, we barely spoke. He slept in the guest room. We passed each other like ghosts, bullet, but hollow. On Friday night, the eve of the symposium, I found a note on the fridge. I'll be gone for the weekend. Staying at Mark's, no good luck. No, I'm proud of you. Just absence. But by now, I understood. His silence wasn't confusion. It was retreat. And I wouldn't follow. Asterisk, the next morning, I dressed slowly. I chose a royal blue blouse that made me feel rooted. Slacks that whispered power. My mother offered to drive me, her hand resting on mine the entire ride. You nervous? She asked. Yes, I admitted, but not about the speech. What then? I hesitated. What happens after? She nodded like she understood something deeper than words could explain. When we arrived, the lobby buzzed with energy. Women of all backgrounds, all ages, gathered in clusters laughing, networking, rehearsing. I signed in and was ushered backstage. Minutes before my name was called, I stood alone, clutching the note card I'd written my final paragraph on. My palms were sweating, but my heart was steady. They called my name. I stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright, the room quiet. I scanned the audience. My mom was in the second row, eyes locked on me. Hands folded tightly. And in the very back unexpectedly, I saw Amaya. She waved, her smile radiant, mouthed, You got this. Lucas wasn't there, but I was. I stepped up to the podium, and I began. Asterisk, the microphone caught my breath before my voice. For a moment, all I could hear was the sound of my heart, loud and rhythmic, like a drum reminding me I was alive. Here, present. I took a breath, then another, and then I spoke. My name is Danielle Morales. I'm the first person in my family to graduate from college. I paused, letting the words settle. The quiet in the room was total, respectful, attentive, expectant. When I crossed the stage at my graduation last week, I was filled with pride. And then, just as I received my diploma, someone I love whispered, This means nothing without a husband. There was a ripple in the crowd. Heads tilted, eyebrows rose. The quiet changed shape, leaning in, now charged with energy. She probably thought I wouldn't hear, or that I wouldn't react. And she was right. I didn't react. Not out loud, but inside. That sentence broke. Something in me and built something else in its place. I exhaled slowly. I let the moment breathe with me. My story isn't unique. I'm here for every woman who's been told she's only valuable in proximity to a man, who's been told she's too ambitious, too loud, too much, or my personal favorite, too educated for her own good. I've been told that success without a man is incomplete, that degrees gather dust, but a ring means something, and yet I've learned that real meaning comes from knowing who you are, Vin. When others try to write your story for you, asterisk, there was a soft hum of agreement from somewhere in the audience. This isn't a speech about bitterness. It's about reclaiming space, about saying, I am more than a wife. I am more than someone's daughter-in-law. I am a thinker, a builder, a learner, a woman who fought for her name to be called and earned the right to stand here. My voice caught a little. I let it. This wasn't a performance, it was truth. I have loved deeply. I have lost pieces of myself in silence, but I've also found strength in that silence. Not because it was easy, but because I refused to disappear inside someone else's expectations. I looked out over the audience. My mother sat perfectly still, eyes wet, one hand over her heart. Amaya was leaning forward, mouth slightly open, and to the young women out there who are just beginning, know this: you do not need a permission slip to be powerful. You do not need approval to exist as you are. Your dreams do not need to shrink to fit inside a family photo. This, I lifted my note card, this is what matters. Not because I'm here alone, but because I'm here fully. A pause. We are more than wives. We are more than titles. We are the authors of our own stories. The room erupted in applause. I stepped back, my hands trembling. Not from fear, but from release. It was like something had cracked open inside me. I had said what I needed to say, no more silence. No more waiting for someone to defend me. I had defended myself. Backstage, women I didn't know came up to hug me. A council member squeezed my hands and whispered, "That was electric." Another said, "You said what so many of us still can't say." My mother embraced me so tightly afterward, I thought we might both break. "I don't have the words," she whispered, "but I'm proud enough for 10 lifetimes." Amaya found me too, grinning. "I should have filmed it. You burned that stage down." I laughed, I cried, I shook. And then I stood taller than I ever had. Later that night, I returned to a quiet house. Lucas was still gone. I wasn't surprised. But I was done pretending it didn't hurt. There was a time when I would have waited by the door, a time when I would have called him, asked if we were okay, begged for the version of him who once believed in me. But that time had passed. Instead, I opened my email and found another message, this one from a nonprofit I'd interned with a year ago. "Danielle, we saw your name in the Empower Her finalist list. Would you be interested in a project lead position on our civic engagement initiative?" I closed my eyes. The air felt clearer, my path wider. I went to bed alone that night, but I slept soundly. The wind outside howled against the windows as if echoing the unrest growing inside me. The graduation flowers had begun to wilt, a symbolic reminder of how fleeting celebration could be when poisoned by bitterness. I had avoided Margaret, my mother-in-law, for over a week, and in that time, Lucas had grown distant. We were sharing the same space, but our words were hollow, our touch perfunctory. That Friday evening, I sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around me, sipping chamomile tea, trying to find a sense of calm. Lucas had stepped into his home office for a quick work call, or so he said. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, truly. But when I walked past the office to head upstairs, I heard my name. The door wasn't fully closed. She always finds a way to make things about her. Margaret's voice crackled through the speakerphone. I froze. I'm not saying I don't support her education. But Lucas, come on. You've been babysitting her dreams long enough. What's next? A PhD? Who's going to take care of a family if she keeps chasing all this nonsense? Lucas chuckled. Mom. You know how she is. Emotional, sensitive. But yeah, I know. I get it. Those words pierced sharper than any insult Margaret had thrown at me. I stood there in the dark hallway, the walls suddenly cold, my body rooted like stone. I hadn't cried since the graduation, but now the tears burned again, this time deeper. Not because of Margaret, but because of him, Lucas, my husband. The man who stood beside me on the stage that day with a proud smile. The man who held my hand but now held a knife behind his back. I went upstairs quietly. I didn't confront him, not yet. I needed to feel the full weight of this betrayal, to understand what came next. But that night, I didn't sleep beside him. Instead, I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling, repeating that one word he said on the call. Sensitive. They always said it like it was a flaw. But maybe my sensitivity wasn't weakness. Maybe it was the very thing that kept me human in a world trying to erase my worth. The clinking of cutlery against porcelain was the only sound filling the tense air. We were seated at the long oak table in their suburban home. Me, Daniel, his parents, and a few extended relatives. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration of my graduation. A formality, perhaps. But after what had happened at the ceremony, nothing about this evening felt ordinary. I could barely taste the food. Every bite was rubbery. Not because of poor cooking, but because my stomach had twisted itself into knots. Across the table, Margaret, my mother-in-law, sat with an expression that hovered between smugness and propriety, as if daring me to crack. Daniel tried. He genuinely tried. He kept offering me wine, lightly touching my wrist, asking if I was okay, trying to pull me back into the present moment. But there was no coming back from a wound that was still bleeding. Midway through the main course, Uncle Greg raised his glass. To Olivia, he said, smiling warmly. First in the family to earn a graduate degree. That's no small feat. Everyone politely raised their glasses. Margaret didn't. She dabbed at the corners of her mouth with her napkin and muttered, "Academic degrees don't keep you warm at night." Asterisk, it wasn't loud, but it was intentional. And the silence that followed was absolute. I set my fork down. My hands trembled slightly, but I locked eyes with her. "Margaret," I said, voice calm, "do you believe a woman's worth is tied only to her marital status?" She gave a faint smile. "I believe family is what gives meaning to achievement." "Then you should be proud of your son. He's the one who helped me survive my darkest semesters. And he's not my husband yet. Is his support meaningless?" Daniel shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "I just think a woman feels complete when she has a partner," Margaret added, trying to sound less pointed. "And frankly, all this celebration without a ring on the finger, it feels premature." It was as if she'd yanked a wire from a fragile bridge. My mind raced. The invisible expectation, the performative grace, the years I had spent proving myself through sleepless nights, tears behind closed doors, caffeine highs, financial struggles, the loneliness of being the only woman of color in a cohort full of entitled confidence, and still, my success was premature because no man had validated it with a ring. I stood up slowly, napkin falling from my lap. If I had waited for someone to marry me before becoming someone, I wouldn't be standing here at all. I felt the table collectively inhale. I am proud of my education because I earned it. I am proud of Daniel, yes. But let's make something clear. His support didn't define me. It helped me, but I was already whole. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "There's no need to get defensive." Asterisk, I'm not defensive. I'm done being silent. Then I looked at Daniel. "And you, Dan, if you think the only way your mother will ever respect me is with a ring, then maybe this relationship has an expiration date." He blinked, stunned. Thought the room fell into a fragile, trembling silence. And then, softly, from the far end of the table, came a voice I didn't expect. Daniel's younger cousin, Sophie, no older than 19. "I think you're amazing, Olivia. I hope I can be like you someday." It hit me like a wave. That someone younger had been watching, listening, that maybe the words I'd spoken had cracked open something beyond the walls of this tense household. I sat back down, with dignity, with silence, with power. And Margaret, for once, didn't have a single thing to say. Asterisk, the days after the dinner felt like walking through fog. I avoided my mother-in-law and kept conversations with Daniel to bare minimums. His silence was deafening. But more than that, I felt an unbearable weight settling on my chest, the weight of fighting for respect in a world that refused to see me as whole. Asterisk, then, one afternoon, an unexpected envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, no name on the front. I hesitated, heart pounding. Before tearing it open, inside was a letter, handwritten, from Professor Langdon, my advisor. Someone who had believed in me when I doubted myself most. Asterisk, Dear Danielle, I wanted to say how proud I was to see you at graduation, despite the pain you endured. What you achieved is remarkable, not just academically, but emotionally. I know your journey has been far from easy. Please consider applying for the graduate fellowship I mentioned. It could be the next step in your journey. My eyes welled up. Here was someone who saw me, who believed in me not because of a ring or a name, but because of me. That evening, I called my mom and told her about the letter. Her voice cracked as she told me, "You deserve to be seen for who you truly are." Later, when Daniel came home, I found the courage to confront him again. "I can't keep pretending your silence means support," I said firmly. "If you want to be part of this, you have to stand with me, not behind your mother's shadow." He looked at me, eyes full of conflict. "I'm trying," he whispered, "but I'm scared I'll lose my family if I do." I nodded slowly. Maybe we both need to decide who we want to be. Asterisk, the weeks that followed were filled with difficult conversations. I realized that respect, above all, had to start with me, and I began to build a life where my worth wasn't tied to anyone's approval. The weeks after receiving Professor Langdon's letter were some of the most challenging I'd ever faced. The distance between Daniel and me grew, but so did my resolve. I applied for the fellowship. I prepared for interviews. I found strength in my friends, in my mother's unwavering support, and in my own reflection, no longer a woman defined by whispers or expectations, but by her own voice. One afternoon, I invited Daniel for coffee. I needed to say the things that had been stuck in my throat. we're at a crossroads, I said gently. I can't keep waiting for you to choose between me and your family. He looked down, then back at me. I don't know what to do. Maybe it's not about choosing me or them. Maybe it's about choosing you and who you want to be. He nodded slowly. I want to be better. I hope so, I replied honestly. But I won't make this fight alone anymore. Walking away from that cafe, I felt a bitter sadness mixed with a fierce hope. If Daniel wasn't ready to stand with me now, I had to stand without him. Later that week, I received the news. I'd been awarded the fellowship. It was the validation I needed, not from a husband or a mother-in-law, but from myself. The stage was set for the final act. Asterisk. The day of the fellowship orientation arrived like a quiet storm, both daunting and full of promise. I stood in front of the mirror, dressed not for approval, but for myself. The blue blouse from the symposium, the same one that had made me feel rooted, now paired with a blazer that felt like armor. As I stepped into the hall, a familiar face greeted me. Professor Langdon, with a warm smile that said, "You belong." Here I found my seat among other fellows, each with their own story of struggle and triumph. For the first time, I felt like I was not alone, but part of something bigger. Midway through the day, my phone buzzed, a message from Daniel. "Can we talk? I want to understand, really understand, who you've become." I hesitated. This was the moment I had prepared for, the moment when I could either hold on to the past or embrace my future. I typed back, "I'm proud of who I am. I hope you find your way to." I didn't wait for a reply. Later, as I took the stage to give my first presentation as a fellow, I felt the weight of every whispered doubt lift from my shoulders. "This journey is mine," I said, voice steady and strong, not defined by others, but by my own determination and dreams. The applause was thunderous. In that moment, I was not just a graduate, a wife, or a daughter-in-law. I was Danielle, whole, powerful, and free.